The night Wade Harlan stumbled back into Cedar Ridge. The storm rolling over the mountains wasn't half as fierce as the one he'd carried in his chest for 20 years. Once he had been the pride of the valley, a foreman with steady hands, a devoted husband with a future brighter than sunrise over the ridge. But the fire that claimed Sarah had scorched more than timber and walls. It hollowed him out until nothing was left but a man drifting through the Montana wilderness like a ghost searching for its own grave. When he stepped onto Main Street with his last silver dollar in his pocket, he wasn't hoping for salvation. He wanted a roof for the night, maybe a bite of food. Instead, he walked into Murphy's General Store, where a charity auction for abandoned storage units was underway. The kind of gamble desperate men took when they had nothing left to lose. A rusty metal door rattled open beneath the weak lantern light, and the fortune inside hit Wade like a blow to the chest. Wooden crates filled with gold coins, bearer bonds, survey maps, deeds, and secrets so deep they seemed to whisper through the dusty air. In that single moment, the broken widower with nothing became the heir to a hidden empire built by Cornelius Blackwood, a vanished railroad titan whose shadow still stretched across the Rockies. And before Wade could understand why fate had chosen him, powerful men realized he had been chosen at all. The town gathered around him that night, just as they had 20 years earlier after the fire. But this time, their hands lifted him instead of lowering him into grief. They pooled coins and crumpled bills to help him outbid banker Harrison Webb, whose smile carried the soft smugness of a man used to buying desperation by the pound. Wade didn't know why his neighbors rallied behind him. Perhaps they sensed the fragile hope inside him fighting to breathe again. Or maybe they remembered the man he'd once been before sorrow carved deep lines into his face. When the unit opened and treasure glittered under the lamplight, Cedar Ridge gasped as one, but none louder than Wade himself. There, beneath layers of dust, lay entire kingdoms disguised as filing cabinets and crates, mining rights, water rights, maps tracing future rail lines across 3 states. It was wealth meant for nations, not men. But mixed among gold and documents, Wade found something heavier, a sense of responsibility he thought he'd buried with Sarah. And when Rebecca Martinez, grown from a gap-toothed child into a sharp-eyed woman who carried her mother's strength, stepped through the fading light, he felt something shift inside him. She read the documents with practiced precision, her fingers steady where it shook. "This isn't just money, Mr. Harlan," she whispered. "This is power, the kind men kill to keep." And the truth of those words arrived faster than the storm rolling over the ridge. James Morrison came first, a polished predator wrapped in an expensive suit, the kind of man whose smile could ruin a town as easily as a drought. He claimed to represent the Mountain Pacific Railroad, but the practiced politeness in his voice had the weight of a threat behind it. He offered Wade $5,000 for old papers, a sum unimaginable to a man who'd lived off venison and river water for 2 decades. But Morrison's eagerness betrayed him. No one paid that kind of money for worthless curiosities. Behind Morrison came rumors, then counterfeit marshals, and finally a late-night siege at Dr. Martinez's house. An assault Wade, Rebecca, and Sheriff Coleman narrowly escaped. Each attack revealed more layers of corruption woven through the railroads, the banks, and the government itself. And with each revelation, Blackwood's legacy became clearer. The vanished tycoon hadn't run from greed. He'd been hunted for resisting it. Every crate Wade opened seemed to murmur warnings from a man who had spent his final years gathering proof of the conspiracy that suffocated the West. But the most startling discovery came not in a crate, but in a hidden safe. Blackwood was alive. His journal spoke of choosing Wade, watching him for years, waiting for the moment he'd be ready to inherit not riches, but a war. The realization that Blackwood lived somewhere in the mountains electrified Wade's veins with a purpose he hadn't felt since before the fire. Survey Map 47B, marked with a small red X, pointed to a remote ridge 20 miles north, a place Wade knew intimately from years spent wandering the wilderness in grief. Morrison wanted that map more than gold itself, and when he cornered Wade and Rebecca in the storage unit with gunmen at his back, the threat in his voice was ice cold. Wade had endured decades of loneliness, but when Morrison held up a photograph he had taken of Rebecca that morning, an unspoken promise of violence, something ancient and protective rose inside him. In the chaos that followed, gunshots cracked like splintering. Timbers and Wade yanked Rebecca into a concealed maintenance tunnel beneath the warehouse district. Darkness swallowed them as Morrison's fury echoed behind them. Breathless, bruised, clutching Blackwood's map and evidence folder, they fled through the underground network like hunted animals. When they emerged into Murphy's basement, the old shopkeeper didn't waste breath with questions. He armed them, handed them supplies, and pressed into Wade's hands a leather folder labeled for Wade Harlan, the complete evidence. Wade opened it to find the smoking heart of the conspiracy: bribes, assassination plans, forged legislation, and a list of honest men marked for elimination. Blackwood hadn't hidden a treasure. He had hidden a revolution. And Wade, weary and ragged, found himself its unlikely general. Before they could flee, Wade confronted ghosts he had carried longer than any gold. Sitting at Dr. Martinez's worn kitchen table, he finally told Rebecca and her mother the truth of Sarah's death, not the fire itself, but the ruin, pride, and fear that led to it. He confessed how he'd ridden farther and farther from home to avoid the shame of their collapsing finances, leaving Sarah alone to fight battles she never should have faced. She died trying to protect him from the proof of their failures, a bundle of bills and threats she tried to burn before he returned. For 20 years he had believed he deserved nothing but the cold quiet of the mountains. But as he spoke, Rebecca reached for his hand, her touch steady as sunrise. In her eyes, he didn't see judgment, only fierce compassion. "She wouldn't want you buried with her," Rebecca whispered. "Not when you still have the power to save others from men like the ones who destroyed your life." The weight he'd carried for decades eased, not because the past changed, but because he finally stopped carrying it alone. When he placed Sarah's wedding ring on Dr. Martinez's mantle, it felt like laying down a burden and stepping into a future he wasn't sure he deserved, but one he was willing to fight for. For the first time in years, Wade chose not to run. He chose to stand. As Morrison's men spread across Cedar Ridge, the small town that once mourned him now became a fortress of quiet resistance. Sheriff Coleman risked his badge. Dr. Martinez risked her home. Murphy risked his life. And Rebecca risked everything. Together they began decoding the last of Blackwood's files, uncovering a monstrous network of corruption stretching from mining camps to senators' offices. The Vanderbilt Morgan Syndicate had bought governors, judges, and railroads, using fear and blood to pave their empire across the West. Blackwood had gathered the evidence piece by piece, knowing he could never expose it alone. That was why he chose Wade, a man who had nothing left to fear losing. When Rebecca discovered Blackwood's secret codicil naming Wade as the rightful heir and executor of his life's mission, the truth hit him like cold water. None of this was accident. Blackwood had orchestrated the charity auction, the timing, even the community support. Wade's suffering hadn't made him weak, it had made him incorruptible. And now the syndicate hunted not just for treasure, but for the one man chosen to destroy them. With Morrison closing in and Blackwood waiting in the mountains, Wade and Rebecca slipped out of Cedar Ridge under cover of night, following the narrow deer trails Wade once walked in sorrow. Now he walked them with purpose. The storm clouds that brewed overhead were heavy with more than rain. They carried the weight of a reckoning long overdue. As they climbed higher, the town lights faded behind them like memories finally put to rest. The path grew treacherous, but Rebecca stayed at his side, her courage burning like a lantern in the dark. Morrison's men stalked the lower trails, gunfire echoing faintly through the canyons, but Wade knew these ridges better than his own heartbeat. Every step carried him closer to the truth, to the man who had started this war, and to the inheritance Wade never wanted but could no longer refuse. Somewhere ahead, hidden among pines and stone, an old cabin waited. And inside it, Cornelius Blackwood, alive, hunted, and holding the final key to destroying the empire that had stolen so many lives. When dawn finally broke, filtering through the pines in soft gold, Wade understood the journey had changed him. He was no longer the hollow widower who walked into Cedar Ridge with one tarnished coin and a lifetime of regret. He was the inheritor of a purpose larger than gold, larger than grief, a purpose that bound him to Rebecca, to Cedar Ridge, and to the fight Blackwood had begun. As the cabin came into view, smoke curling gently from its chimney, Wade felt something bloom inside him for the first time in 2 decades. Not hope alone, but direction. "Whatever waits inside," Rebecca murmured, "we face it together." Wade took her hand, steady and certain. The mountain wind carried the promise of storms and salvation all at once. And as they stepped toward the door where destiny waited, he felt Sarah's memory settle in his heart like a blessing rather than a burden. This wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of justice long overdue. Thank you for walking with us through this tale. Until next time, may your own path lead you somewhere brighter than where you began.